everyone. I'm Tony Ragoonanan, a learner and development professional here in the Caribbean. I have with me Edwin Martinez, a people management consultant and facilitator. And I'll get Edwin to tell you a bit about himself, and then we could continue.
Sure. Hi, Tony, and hi, everyone. My name is Edwin Martinez, and I'm also a consultant in the Caribbean. I specialize on performance management and team development, as well as organizational culture issues.
Okay, great. So we decided that it was a good idea to do this podcast because with this situation, many of us are now working from home. And as leaders, how do you manage your employees' performance? It involves many of the same principles as when we are actually face to face. So Edwin, where do we start with this?
Well, we have to recognize that the issue or the principles of performance management are the same. There's some things that we need to be particularly careful of when we're dealing with remote performance management. So there's some ideas that we need to clarify a bit more. I don't know if it's been your experience, but in my experience, there's a lot of confusion out there on how to do this process. And especially middle-sized and smaller companies struggle a lot in trying to get managers and supervisors to get it right.
So what is the first thing that we need to think about when we manage performance? I mean, companies have their vision, their mission, and they also have organizational values. Now, from there, what do we need to think about to make sure that we can deliver on those values?
Well, maybe we should define a little more clearly what we mean by values and competencies and behaviors and all this, yes. Because these terms are thrown around very often, and I'm not sure everyone is clear about them. You're right. In my experience, I also see most companies with a group of values and competencies that they want to see met. Some of them don't have any competencies mentioned, but at least a set of values that they want to follow through. The connection between values and behaviors is that your behavior is supposed to reflect the value, which is a principle, the value that you're following. But in my experience, there's very little effort to connect those two things. So we think as performance management as whatever I need to do in order to get things done, but little connection to those values that we proclaim all over the organization. Is that your experience as well?
I've had that same experience. I think companies focus a lot on values, and from there they go straight to the end results without defining what are the actual behaviors we need to get the results. So the behaviors for me is sort of like the drivers. I mean, it's not only behaviors, but the activities you have to do to get those end results. But the behaviors matter a lot because they determine the quality of work that you get in getting results.
Sure, and I can basically say that your behavior is what you do and how you do it. So it involves a bit of attitudes as well. The emotional elements are involved in how you behave. But we need to set a particular set of behaviors. We need to define them and identify exactly what are the behaviors that we want to measure in order to be fair in our evaluation process.
Okay. All right.
So that means that there's a conversation that needs to take place at the beginning of this process. And if it has not taken place, it should take place as soon as possible, especially when you're in remote. But
yes.
The supervisor or manager needs to clarify what are the particular behaviors that he wants to see that reflect the values that the organization promotes in whatever goal they're trying to achieve. So you can see the chain.
Right. So is this the expectation argument? Is this the expectation conversation?
Well, yes, they're part of the behaviors are part of what you expect, but you may also expect some other things more specific, like attitudes and how they reflect those behaviors and how behaviors reflect attitudes, because those two things go both ways. So So it's easier for the manager or supervisor to think in terms of what is it that I expect from you, because these are the behaviors that I'm looking that reflect these values. I'm just using that logic to show the thread. So let me tell you what I expect, and that creates a connection between supervisor and supervisee in order to provide the framework for that evaluation process to take place. And I distinguish those two things. Tony, I think you've lived this as well as I have, that people confuse the evaluation tool, the one that takes place at the end of the year, with the evaluation process, which is something that you do every single month related to the behaviors and the performance of that employee.
Yes.
There are two. Obviously, the evaluation is part of the evaluation process, but there are two separate things. I need to think in terms of a process in order to get to the final part, which is the evaluation tool.
How are the behaviors related to competencies?
Let me ask you this question first.
Sure.
How many people have you met in your practice that actually know what a competency is?
Not many.
The percentage is very low.
Yeah, they use competencies they use maybe a word or phrase that sounds nice. It sounds nice, but is it what you really need? So let's define what that is, and then we can move on to see what employees think.
In order for to make it as simple as possible for our viewers and not create more confusion, I like to think of competencies as the combination of the knowledge, the skills that I have, and my abilities, and how they are applied to the work I'm doing. So now the competency is the concept behind being competent. Let's take, for example, initiative. Okay.
Right.
The competency is initiative, but in order for me to be competent on that competency, I need to show in my behavior that I actually am able to apply that in the work I do and how I behave every day.
Right.
That's being competent in the competency.
Right. So in being able to deliver on that competency, it would deliver also on the value that the company may be promising, the idea, the belief within the company.
Yes. In this discussion, we cannot lose sight of the fact that all this needs to be aligned. Whenever we talked about behaviors, they have to be aligned with the values. The same thing with the competencies. Okay? Yes. Usually, bigger companies have a set of values already developed, as most companies do, but they also provide you with a set of competencies tied to those values, so that the supervisor now can apply particular behaviors to the competency that are already tied to the values. But in medium-sized and smaller companies, most people don't have the proper tools in order to develop that effectively, and it can be very confusing for them. But it can be worked out with the proper tools.
Yes, because I see the competencies as something larger. It's not only how you live within the company, it also is used to hire. I know that some of the larger companies use it already, but some of the smaller companies may need to jump on board so that they maintain their organizational culture, at least.
Again, it comes back to alignment. We will teach them about our organizational values and our culture so that they can develop inside our company. That's why development is such an important concept in all this process. But yes, even the hiring process needs to be aligned with that. You're absolutely right.
Right. So as long as we have these behaviors, once they are defined, what do you feel is the next step once these behaviors are defined? Well, assume now that the employees know what is expected of them in terms of behaviors.
Yeah, that step that you just mentioned there implies that there has been a conversation, or at least a couple of conversations, in which these things have been clarified and both parties know exactly what's going to happen in the next 12 months. So that sets the stage for what's really important of the process, and that is, how do I follow through with a series of conversations, feedback, coaching, one-on-ones throughout the year, in order to keep that aligned with whatever we agreed at the beginning of the process, with the expectations that we agreed, with the behaviors that we agreed. So, and that's where most people fail. That's why we need to understand that this is really a process that needs to take place throughout the year. Now, when you're remote, that is a little more tricky in the sense that these conversations have to take place still. You cannot put them on hold. You cannot expect everything stop because you're on remote. You need to redefine your goals, maybe, redefine your expectations, have that conversation again, apply to the situation so that no one feels lost. If you don't do that, what happens is the team or the person reporting to you may lose perspective, purpose, clarity, and that is terrible for whatever results
Yeah.
you're trying to achieve.
Well, I think regular conversations is key because that is, for me, the way to build trust.
Absolutely.
But also, in terms of that process, I mean, while these conversations are going on and you are given feedback, I think it's also important to get feedback on how you might be doing.
A conversation is defined by a two-way dialogue. So,
Yes.
so it's not just us telling them what we expect, but they also need to, I tend to call it pushback, and try to let us know what worries them about our expectations so that we can reach an agreement. Then there's what you mentioned now. I also need to leave room for the person to be able to let me know how I'm doing as a manager, as a supervisor. I need
Yeah.
to provide that space. Here's the trick though. Most people don't dare to do that. Most employees don't dare to do that because there's what we call now, there's no psychological safety in that situation because of the issues of trust that you just mentioned.
Yeah,
So,
I've seen psychological safety come up quite a bit in
yeah.
conversations.
And all it means is that people feel safe, that they're not going to be humiliated or they're not going to be demeanored because of something they say or do. Even if they made a mistake, they know that they're going to be treated fairly and not be an embarrassment to them. That's mainly what it includes some other things, but mainly that's what psychological safety means. And it's important, right. Just like sometimes we mention that we say that managers are responsible for the environment of the workplace.
Yes.
Well, they are. What that means is that we need, in the practical terms, we need to provide our employees psychological safety so that they can feel free and safe to tell us what they think and tell us how they differ from us or how we can become a better leader.
Yes, for me the environment is key. And some years ago, I saw this formula created by Kurt Lewin, who was a psychologist. This was maybe created in 1936. He said behavior is a function of a person in an environment. So if the correct environment is created, it depends on the person as well, but you get the right behavior.
That's a good one.
And one of the challenges I see sometimes in that receiving and giving feedback is that many people don't take negative feedback well, especially when they're a leader. And sometimes they have to show that level of vulnerability because, as you and I know, that dysfunction of a team is that lack of trust. And when we can't be vulnerable to know that we are not perfect, then I think we're on the right track in moving forward.
It's interesting because you're absolutely right. And vulnerability is an important part of that.
Yes.
In the Caribbean, there's still a strong sense of power for a manager or any kind of leader. So there's a big power distance in many of our cultures, which means that people tend to respect the leader in such a way that they feel they cannot be totally honest with them. In other cultures, that's a little easier to do, like, for example, the United States. But in our Caribbean cultures, that is a little more difficult to do. And that vulnerability from the part of the leader is necessary. And that's why in some years in psychology that we've been talking about leaders need to be vulnerable. Voluntary vulnerability is something that's desirable to achieve that level of trust with the person you're dealing with.
So what is the difference now that we are remote? How do we make this work?
Okay. First thing is that we do not have to suppose that the process is put on hold. We must continue providing our employees with that sense of feedback and of purpose and clarity, even though the situation is fluid and is so different to what we're used to. So my main argument with this is that now that we are remote, don't stop doing it, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
There's an initial conversation that has to take place now, and if you didn't have it before, now is the time to do it. And that is, now that we are on remote, do the goals change? No or yes. My expectations change. I suppose they do because now you're in a different set of situations. This person will be working from home. There are other things they'll have to be doing. How much time are they going to be spending in front of the camera with you? How many times are we going to talk? What kind of follow-through or follow-up am I going to give? What can they expect from my conversations with them? What is it that I need from those conversations? How often am I going to get them through with you? All these things need to be cleared now so that they feel, even though it's a fluid situation, it's a little uncomfortable for most of us because we're not used to it. It'll provide a context that will make both of us feel more comfortable and more secure, more of a sense of security in what we're doing. Other things that we need to keep in mind, because this conversation is going to take place remotely now, make sure that people are aware that you want to listen their part. In other words, we tend to become very directive because we're dealing with this mechanism, but they need to feel that there is a true conversation going on, and it's both ways. So in spite of the fear we have of cameras and all this awkward thing, I need to open that space and have them agree with what I'm saying or with what I'm expecting, so that we can actually have that dialogue in a proper sense. So once that is agreed, then we know exactly what to expect in the following connections that we have. We don't know how long this is going to last, and probably we'll be seeing more of this type of connection later on, even though some normalcy will return. Maybe this will be part of now the process, and it won't be only just in the office. So we need to get used to this, and we need to open that dialogue and deal with it. For example, eye contact. How do we deal with eye contact through this mechanism? Well, sometimes you need to stop and look at the camera so that you can provide that sense that I'm looking at you and you're there and I'm here, and I need to listen. I need to be careful in what I ask questions. I believe in asking a lot of questions in this process, because it's how you make sure you're being understood or not. So, and sometimes we need to learn how to speak slower. Some of us are a little hyper at the way we speak. I have that problem. So we need to control that a bit, because we're in front of a camera. We need to provide now the proper environment through electronic means, which is not the same as when you're out there in person. So keep those elements in mind. Practice will give you a better sense of how to do it, and observing how the other person reacts to what you're saying. Ask them quite often, how are they feeling as work progresses in this situation? And make sure that they feel that you are concerned about their well-being and their sense of security and the psychological safety.
We know that everyone will have things to do, but what about setting the priorities? What about the priorities? Because one thing will always be more important than the other.
In my experience, Tony, most of the people that are being managed are mostly confused about priorities, especially because some people think that the priorities are set in stone and then they don't change ever. And the reality is that priorities change all the time. One of the things that needs to be clarified quickly in this situation, the remote situation, is that of priorities. And every single day or every single couple of days, we need to recalibrate priorities, because it could be a source of a lot of confusion and maybe missed opportunities if we don't talk about what are those priorities for the next couple of days or whatever. And every time a priority changes, that's a good reason to have a conversation and reset those priorities in place.
What are some recommendations we could add to this scenario?
One of the most common conversations that we have is a conversation about performance. How am I doing? That has to do with some of the feedback that I provide. Okay. Usually feedback is in one direction. I tell you what I saw and what I think you should do. But in the conversation, I could tell, listen, I've given you these feedbacks. I haven't seen changes, or I've seen changes. I think you're doing well. That conversation is one of those elements we need to include in the conversation.
Right, but that is one of the challenges. Another one of the challenges I see is that positive and negative feedback is they have two different challenges. The challenge with positive feedback is that we just don't give it.
Yeah, that's a source for another podcast right there.
Yeah, I know. And one of the challenges with negative feedback is that people don't know how to do it. They give it the wrong way, or they don't let employees know that I'm giving you negative feedback, but I want to give it in a way that lets you know that you are on my side.
Yeah. I think in your practice you have encountered, because we've talked about this before, Tony, that most of the feedback that we hear out there is negative feedback.
Yes.
Because there's this chip in the minds of supervisors in most places, not everyone, but in many places, that my job is to correct whatever it's wrong. So it's this concept that the working environment or the organization is a machinery, and I just have to make sure, like a police officer, I just need to make sure that everything is working properly. So every time something gets out of line, boom, I put it in place. That's not enough nowadays. It's not just about correcting. It's about growing, developing. That's why you say. That's why you say they need to know that I'm on their side, even though I'm telling you that you need to change that. The way I see it is, I need to see this as an opportunity for growth. And some managers tell me, is that my responsibility? And I tend to answer, absolutely yes. That is your responsibility. You are in charge of these people, and it's your responsibility to develop and grow with them and have them become better people and better employees, a better person and better employee. So yes, and there comes the issue of trust involved again. You know, how do you make sure that they know that you're being genuine, that you're being authentic when you say to them that you want to see them do better? Is that just a phrase that I'm throwing out there, or am I being authentic and genuine and saying, you know what, I want you to do better. Let me help you out here. Let me show you how, and I'm going to give you some feedback. Don't take it personal, but I want to see you go. You know, and you can do the same thing with me. Maybe I'm talking to you in a matter that you don't like. Let me know that so I can work that out. Those things are very important. Very important.
Yes, for me, and we need to be consistent. I think people need to be consistent with that.
Good point.
Equality of the conversation.
Some people believe that because I had the initial conversation on expectations and goals and competencies or whatever, that check, I complied with HR, I did this, and I filled out the evaluation form, I'm done with this. It's that, again, that concept that we think that one thing is enough, when actually I need to prove to everyone that I'm being consistent with my intention. It's not a one thing, it's not a one-time thing, it's a continuous thing. That's how I show continuity, that's how I show consistency, and we all know that consistency is a very important part of trust.
Let's wrap up with some key recommendations. I mean, you give me what you think are your key recommendations, and I'll add in what I feel is important as well.
Of course, please do. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, one of the major things we need to keep in mind is that I should not put the process on hold simply because we're working remotely. That's the first takeaway.
That's one, for sure.
Okay. The second one, in my perspective, is have that conversation where in which the expectations have changed, the priorities have changed, maybe even the goals have changed. Have that conversation to set that straight so that they both know exactly in what direction they're moving for the next couple of weeks or months.
Yeah, so clarity is important here. For me, clarity is always important.
You summarize it as clarity. You're correct. It is clarity. It's a way of providing also purpose. You know, let's keep the purpose in mind, even though the situation has changed. That creates confusion and uncertainty in a lot of people because this is a very different situation. So let's keep the purpose focused. Let's keep that conversation with those particular elements in mind. That's key here. That's very important. And then one of the other things that I think you have to keep in mind is have those conversations then and as often as necessary, and allow the supervisee also to take the first step in that first step for that conversation if he feels that is necessary. It doesn't have to be the supervisor or the manager who initiates the conversation always. They should, and it will prove to you that he feels a psychological safety net if they feel comfortable in telling, we need to talk. Okay, sure, here I am. Let's go and do it. So that's how this should work under these circumstances. Even though once we get back to normal, if we ever get there, these principles should still be in place. The more reason to have them in place when you're back to normal if you get back to that normal.
Yeah, it might be tough to create trust in quarantine if you didn't have it before. But one thing I wanted to ask, and this is just to add to the recommendations, is coaching. Continuous coaching must happen as well, whether it's formal or informal.
Unfortunately, coaching is a specialized kind of skill that managers need to develop, and they're used only for particular cases. Coaching is not for everything, and it's not for everyone. but but it's a very important tool. So yes, I think that, and maybe that's again another material for another podcast, where we can talk about the particulars of coaching in this setting, the supervisor and the supervisee setting. But along with feedback, along with one-on-ones of all sorts, with different issues in these conversations, coaching is also part of that. And all of these one-on-ones, all of these feedbacks and conversations, they should not be haphazard. They should be pre-planned. I should know in my mind exactly what is it that I want to achieve in this conversation, so it goes well, and I don't extend it for too long or be too short. I need to have a clear agenda or a clear purpose. That's the proper word. A clear purpose in mind for that conversation to take place. And once the purpose is achieved, boom, that's that conversation. Everything else is left for another time.
Right. And I think it's important also for leaders to be authentic in terms of making it relevant and honest and genuine.
Which brings the point in this situation that if I don't know the answers of some of their concerns, I have to be honest and say, you know what?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to, and there's no problem with that. Actually, uncertainty is part of life. We live with uncertainty anyway. So this is no different. But sometimes people are looking for guarantees when there are none. There's some things we can. I always try to provide with employees under these situations what I call a light at the end of the tunnel, something that they could look forward to and know that we're achieving something, we're getting there, okay? But we need also to let them know that there's some things that I am not certain about, and it's okay to admit that I'm not certain about certain things. Well, you mentioned the authentic part. That genuineness is so important. If you try to fake it, everybody realizes because the camera will catch it.
Oh, you went to training last week.
So be honest. That's the bottom line is we need to be honest about the whole thing. Be genuine, and your concern should be that genuine. But your concern for their well-being, for their clarity and purpose as we work through all this.
I agree.
Yeah, I would like to tell the people who are watching this, if you're in a company where you feel that this needs to be discussed, feel free to ask questions. Write to us. Let us know how we can help if in any way, because I think it's very important, not only because of the pandemic, but every time. This is a very important part of the relationship between employees and employers. And now we talk a lot about talent management. This is an important chunk of talent management. So if you really want to manage talent, you need to know how to manage performance and do it right and do it properly. So there's a lot to be done on this area, and I'm looking forward to see if we can help whoever feels they need help with this.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks a lot, Edwin, for the conversation.
Thank you.